Today we're going to talk about the development of cell theory, and we're going to be using this little foldable. So the first thing you need to do is cut out on the outside solid lines. Don't cut out anything else, just cut along this outside edge. Alright, so we're going to trim around here. We're going to be using your journal, page 8. Alright, so you don't need the rest of that. You just need this. And your journal, we're going to open up to page 8. Alright, now we're going to pre-fit this so it looks like it fits rather nicely. But here's the thing. We're only going to put glue on the back of these little parts, okay? So when we flip this over, we are only putting a thin line of glue down each of these sides, okay? Now that I have my glue on, I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to put it on page 8. Now that it is glued down, I want you to put your finger underneath the part that's not glued down, and we're going to cut just this paper, not our journal, but we're going to cut straight up just like that, and then here and here. So now we have flaps that we can work with. Okay, so you should be able to see behind those. Now at the very top, we're going to write cell theory. All right, cell theory is very important. So much so that you will also need to have this information when you get to high school biology. So knowing that this is the theory of how we came to realize that all living things are made of cells. And it didn't happen by just one person. It didn't happen all at one time. It was a gradual process, and the development of the microscope helped us to develop this theory. So we're going to put our date, August 30th, there in the top corner. So first of all, let's look at what are cells. Notice there are 3 different cells here. Originally it just had these 2, and I added this one. Not all cells are alike, and I want you to realize that there's more than just plants and animals, okay? There's also bacteria and different things. So I added a picture, okay? So when we talk about cells, defining cells, we're going to start up here. The cell is the basic unit of life. And if yours doesn't all fit on one line, you can put it on more than one line. It makes up all, cells make up all living organisms. Remember, they're made of 1 or more cells. Cells can be either prokaryotic, which means they have no nucleus. They have DNA, but they don't have a nucleus. Or they can be eukaryotic, which means they have a nucleus that contains their DNA. All right? So, basic unit of life, make up all living organisms. There are 2 types of cells. They can be prokaryotic cells or they can be eukaryotic cells. And from there, we can further subdivide them. But they're either going to be prokaryotic, meaning they do not have a nucleus, or they're going to be eukaryotic, meaning they do have a nucleus. Eu rhymes with do, pro rhymes with no. So prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. All right? And when we talk about the people that were involved, it says who were Robert Hooke and Anton von Leeuwenhoek. We already know this, but we're going to go ahead and add this to our cell theory. Robert Hooke is credited with the discovery of the cell. So Hooke was credited with discovering the cell, naming it a cell, while he was looking at a piece of cork under a microscope. Now these are dead, so of course they weren't moving, but he noticed they looked like little boxes. And he said, hey, that's just like the little square rooms like the monks or the priests live in at the monastery. And they called their rooms cells. So he named these little boxes that he was seeing cells. Leeuwenhoek is credited as being the first person to observe living cells underneath a microscope. He had taken some scrapings from his gunky teeth, and he actually saw bacteria. Now, he didn't name them bacteria, he didn't know what they were, but he is the first person that saw live cells underneath a microscope, and so he is given credit for that. Next it says name 3 scientists that played a major role in the development of cell theory. And so first we have Matthias Schleiden. He was a German botanist. Now botanists study plants. And so once they had discovered the cell, they started looking at everything that they had with the new idea of, is it made of cells? And so every plant that he looked at, he found was made of cells. And so his part of cell theory that he started realizing was all of these plants are made of cells. And Theodor Schwann is another German, and he's a zoologist, or a person that studies animals. And so he started looking at all of the animal tissues that he had, and he found that all the animals are made of cells also. And so these two guys got together and they started working on this cell theory because they thought, hey, if all plants are made of cells and all animals are made of cells, is it reasonable for us to hypothesize that maybe everything that's living is made of cells? And so they started writing cell theory, and one of the main ideas about cell theories is that all living things are made of cells. Now, Rudolf Virchow was a German doctor or physician, and he kind of added in his 2 cents to what these other guys said, and they said not only is all living things made of cells, but cells only come from pre-existing or other cells. He also learned that cells in the body could make someone sick. And so if you had, say, what they now call cancer cells that are multiplying, that could actually make a person sick. They didn't have all those details yet, but he did come up with the part of cell theory that was all cells come from other cells. So exactly what is cell theory? All right, so cell theory has 3 parts. Number 1, cells are the basic unit of life. 2, all living things are made of 1 or more cells. And 3, all cells come from pre-existing cells or other cells, right? And then you can get into the whole question of, which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing. But all cells, you can't just magically have cells generated from nothing, okay? They come from other cells. All right, trying to remember these scientists, Schleiden, Schwann, and Virchow. Schwann sounds like a what? Swan, right? The bird, a swan. He studied animals. A swan is an animal. So that's a way to remember Schwann. Now, Schleiden, you're just going to have to remember that he didn't study animals. It was the other thing. So the other thing is plants. And then Virchow was all cells come from other things. So main two are Schleiden and Schwann. Schwann reminds you of an animal. He was the one that studied animals. He said all animals are made of cells. And then Schleiden was the one that studied plants.